Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is December 3rd, 2023, Sunday, December 3rd, 2023. And as always, we're going to go to my favorite source, which is Stranger Than Fiction Stories. And this one is titled The Ghost at the Sober Duck. In 1979, the Sober Duck Disco and Rock Club in Springfield, Illinois, was blessed by three priests. The priests said that they blessed the establishment to dispel fears that the ghost of a bartender who killed himself there in 1968 haunted the bar. The owner, Tom Blasco, claimed the prayers and holy water worked like a charm. He said the restless soul of bartender Albert Rudy Craner haunted the place where he shot himself in the chest or head on June 27, 1968. Blasco said, quote, "You just had the feeling you were being watched. It would be 90, 95 degrees in the club, and you'd get the coldest, weirdest chills you ever felt go right through you." The owner said Rudy would play a piano stored in the back of the club or blow on an invisible trumpet. He would also throw glasses across rooms and give off bone-chilling cold in other areas. He once appeared to a waitress and told her someone would die soon. In 1977, waitress Barbara Lard said she saw Rudy's transparent head floating one night in an unused part of the club. She heard an inhuman voice that said, "An owner is going to die." Several weeks later, Blasco sighed with relief when an owner of the building who leased the space to him died at age 69. Probably worried that Rudy would foretell about other deaths, the help of the priest was sought out, thinking that since Rudy was Catholic, he needed to be absolved of this worst sin. But every place and everyone has a past, and these are Rudy's and the place he used to haunt. The Sober Duck was once known as the Lake Club, the belle of Midwestern nightclubs, and one of the hottest hotspots between St. Louis and Chicago. It was known for serving the best liquors, good food, and top performers entertained the customers. There was a secret back room where patrons could engage in the illegal thrill of high-stakes gambling. The Lake Club opened in 1940 in a building that had already gone by several names. The founders were Harold Henderson, Hugo Giovanoli, and a third unnamed man who each provided $3,000 seed money to set it up. It changed names in 1968, and new managers and employees started to notice strange feelings like the chill Blasco described and the lonely footsteps when the place was empty. It turned out that one of the ghosts foretold would die was the owner, Harold Henderson. As to Rudy Craner, he married Evelyn Burkhart in 1940, and in 1941 he operated the El Rancho restaurant in Waukegan. By 1948, he owned the Red Pepper restaurant on Green Bay Road and Washington Street on the outskirts of Waukegan. That year, he made the newspapers for an Al Capone-ish type of stunt when he was indicted by a grand jury for evading payment of his income tax. It seemed he hadn't paid taxes on slot machine profits and about $4,000 from poker games with customers. In those years, Lake County was a gambler's paradise in the Chicago area, but gambling was a violation of state law. The judge in that case was surprised when the Lake County state attorney, the sheriff, the mayor of Waukegan, and the Lake Forest chief of police wrote letters speaking of Craner's high character, integrity, and good citizenship. The only thing the judge asked was if these officials knew he had slot machines at his restaurant when they wrote the letters. They all dodged the question. Rudy got 3 years probation and he had to pay a fine. However, in 1949 he hadn't paid and he was arrested at his restaurant where he continued to operate slot machines. He got saved because he had passed ownership of the restaurant to his wife, Evelyn Craner, who said that he wasn't violating his probation because she owned the premises. Rudy kept fighting the courts and asked for a reduction of his fines in 1950. What happened to Rudy between then and 1968, when he was a popular bartender who took his life, is unknown. No obit appeared in the newspaper about his death, or much less what could have driven him to take that drastic step. But it makes you wonder why he decided to do the deed there, of all places. And that's a very unusual name for a disco, the Sober Duck. All right. Next story is from Business Insider, and it's titled, "The Pentagon is Moving Towards Letting AI Weapons Autonomously Decide to Kill Humans." Aye. The deployment of AI controlled drones that can make autonomous decisions about whether to kill human targets is moving closer to reality. This was reported originally at the New York Times. Lethal autonomous weapons that can select targets using AI are being developed by countries including the US, China, and Israel. The use of the so called killer robots would mark a disturbing development, say critics, handing life and death battlefield decisions to machines with no human input. Several governments are lobbying the UN for a binding resolution restricting the use of AI killer drones. But the US is among a group of nations, which also includes Russia, Australia, and Israel, who are resisting any such move, favoring a non binding resolution instead. This is really one of the most significant inflection points for humanity. Alexander Kemet, Austria's chief negotiator on the issue, said, "What the role of human beings in the use of force, it's an absolutely fundamental security issue, a legal issue, and an ethical issue." The Pentagon is working towards deploying a swarms of thousands of AI-enabled drones, according to a notice published earlier this year. In a speech in August, U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks said technology like AI-controlled drone swarms would enable the U.S. to offset China's People Liberation Army, the PLA, numerical advantage in weapons and people. We'll counter the PLA's mass with mass of our own, but ours will be harder to plan for, harder to hit, harder to beat. Frank Kendall, the Air Force Secretary, told the newspapers that AI drones will need to have the capability to make lethal decisions while under human supervision. Individual decisions versus not doing individual decisions is the difference between winning and losing, and you're not going to lose, he said. I don't think people we would be up against would do that, and it would give them a huge advantage if we put that limitation on ourselves. The New Scientist reported in October that AI-controlled drones have already been deployed on the battlefield by Ukraine in its fight against the Russian invasion, though it's unclear if any have taken action resulting in human casualties. The Pentagon did not immediately respond to request for comment. You know what the problem I personally have with this? Because here it's being said, if our enemies have this, we need to have it. My concern is any of these military stuff being turned on the American people, on our citizens, and that concerns me greatly. Let me tell you something. For all of you that are old enough, I'm sure people have seen it, but the original RoboCop, that was one of the when they were the premise of the movie was that they were developing AI or robotics to basically be the police force to replace human policemen. And the how can I tell you the reason why they had developed the RoboCop, which was the giving it a human face versus just a mechanical or totally robotic look, was that to like pacify people like it's a human thing, because I think instinctively all humans know that if something is left, a decision of whether to kill or not kill is left in the hands of a machine, it doesn't go good for the humans, no matter what. So I don't know. I have very mixed feelings about this. Very mixed feelings. But anyway, something to think about. Um, let's go back to Stranger Than Fiction stories. And our next story is titled, When Your Lover Wants Your Heart Along with the Rest of Your Organs. What's that saying about if it sounds too good to be true? It probably is. Blanca Arellano found this out in the most horrendous way. Blanca Arellano, 51, met Juan Pablo Villafuerte, a med student 15 years her junior, online via a gaming app. Blanca, who lived in Mexico, was hooked, and on July 27, 2022, she completed a 3,000-mile trip to Huacho, north of Lima, Peru, to meet the man of her dreams. November 7th was the last time Blanca's family heard from her. There was nothing in her conversation to indicate there was a problem in the relationship. The couple had been living together for over 3 months. The Arellano family became alarmed when they lost touch with Blanca, and her niece Carla Arellano took to social media for help. She tweeted on November 12th, "My aunt Blanca Olivia Orellano Gutierrez disappeared on Monday, November 7th in Peru. We fear for her life." These messages galvanized Peruvian authorities to investigate the whereabouts of Carla's aunt. When Carla communicated with Villafuerte, he said that Blanca was returning to Mexico after they broke up, which was opposite to what her aunt had told her in their last conversation. Blanca's family had no other person in Peru they could ask for help in verifying if their family member was okay, and were forced to accept Villafuerte's story that she had decided to return home after telling him that he couldn't offer her the life she wanted. This behavior was totally unlike Blanca Arellano, who would not have decided to return to Mexico without communicating with her family. On November 10th, the mystery of Blanca's whereabouts came to a horrible resolution. It came in the form of a severed finger with a silver ring on it that washed up on Chorillos Beach in Huacho. This was soon followed by a faceless head, an arm, a disemboweled torso with several broken ribs and all the organs missing. The fingers was matched to Blanca. On November 17th, Villafuerte was arrested on charges of human organs trafficking. Soon after Blanca disappeared, Villafuerte posted a video on TikTok where he dissected body parts that included a brain and pancreas. There's another video where he calmly narrates the dissection of a human stomach. Some of his videos had a warning about its contents being disturbing. Authorities brought blood-sniffing dogs to Villafuerte's home, which was only a rented room. Using luminol, blood splatters were found in the bathroom, also in the laundry room and on his mattress. Police found hair samples, luggage, clothing, and a Mexican flag. Villafuerte's landlady confirmed that Blanca had been staying in the room. Shortly after his arrest, there was an investigation by authorities into whether Villafuerte had an accomplice. It was found that on November 7th, which is believed to be when Blanca was killed, Edson Flores accompanied Villafuerte to a store in the Zona de Manzanares, where he bought cigarettes and 8 large garbage bags. Earlier in the day, Villafuerte had gone to a store where he purchased 2 gallons of lime and muriatic acid. Flores' brother came to police to say his brother was in Lima and not in Huacho on November 7th, and that despite being a classmate of Villafuerte, he had no part in the murder. Authorities said that due to an ongoing strike at the university, the other rooms in the house were unoccupied by students and there were no witnesses for them to interview. During the investigation, police came across who they believe was Villafuerte's actual girlfriend, named Carmen Marilyn Castillo Jimenez, 26, who was arrested under suspicion of having knowledge about the murder. She rented the room she shared with Villafuerte in the San Juan de Lurigancho neighborhood about the time Arellano came to Peru. On November 21st, 2022, the prosecution requested a 9-month jail sentence for Villafuerte in order to prevent him fleeing while the case was being prepared. By then it had been confirmed that the other body parts that had washed up on the beach belonged to Blanca Arellano. When questioned, Villafuerte denied that Blanca was his girlfriend and that she was an indigent that he would occasionally help by giving a little money to. Blanca's niece showed police the chats between her and Villafuerte, in which he claimed the relationship had ended because Blanca had grown bored with him. On December 16, 2022, Villafuerte's appeal was denied and he stayed in jail for 9 months pending his trial. In February 2023, Blanca's remains were cremated and shipped to her family in Mexico. In September 2023, Juan Villafuerte Pinto was sentenced to 35 years in prison. For Blanca Arellano, it was a wrong turn on Lover's Lane. And you know what? On that one, I'm not sure if he actually took her organs and sold them, or if he did that dissection for TikTok kids and then sold them, or just for TikTok. I was out there, but I mean, that's pretty gross. He had a girlfriend, everything. So in other words, he purposely lured this lady from Mexico to Peru. Talk about premeditation. Oh. All right. Next story is out of Anomalian. All right. And this has to do with the discovery of on Mars. A new and intriguing discovery on Mars has been reported. They have found a structure that looks like a wall stretching for 4 kilometers across the Martian surface. This structure is unlike anything else seen on Mars before. It does not match the natural features of the planet, such as ridges or mountains that have been eroded over time. Instead, it appears to be artificial, as if it was built by someone or something. One of the most striking aspects of this structure is that it reflects light, creating a bright spot on the ground. This suggests that it is made of something of a different material than the surrounding terrain, perhaps something metallic or shiny. What could this structure be? Is it possible that it is a remnant of an ancient wall built by a civilization that once lived on Mars? Could it be a clue to the mystery of what happened to Mars, why it became a barren and hostile world? These are the questions that this discovery raises, and they are not easy to answer. There is no definitive evidence that Mars ever had life, let alone intelligent life. However, there are also many anomalies on Mars that challenge the conventional geological explanations. For example, there are pyramids, faces, tubes, and other structures that look artificial. Perhaps this wall is another piece of the puzzle, another hint that Mars was not always as we see it today. Perhaps millions of years ago, Mars had water and a habitable environment, and perhaps there was a civilization that thrived there. And perhaps this wall is one of the few surviving traces of their existence. Of course, this is just speculation, but who knows? And I've heard that uh, there's a lot of people say no, none of those things that you see on the surface that basically they're natural terrain and that they just look, I guess, because of the way the cameras are, that they look artificial or man-made, but they're not. They're part of like the terrain. Good question, because if they could ever prove that Mars was inhabited, that's all puts a whole new spin on things, doesn't it? All right, back to stranger than fiction stories, and this piece is titled "Horrors of a Victorian Dead House." Quote: "My first night in the morgue I shall never forget. In fact, the first month was so full of horrors I wonder how that I ever got through it." Let's go back to 1887. All right, this is St. Louis, Missouri. A morgue superintendent told of his times working at the St. Louis morgue. It's believed the source of the stories was Herman Pradekow, who died in 1891, even though he was interviewed anonymously. He spoke of a prior morgue superintendent who lost his job with a change of administration, but he used to come down every day and hang around looking at the bodies. One night he took a dose of cyanide of potassium and sat down at his table to describe how it felt to die. He had only written a few sentences when he fell over dead. His spirit was said to haunt the morgue. The coroner told that one of his first cases was searching through the pockets of a floater laid out in a pine box, which was already dripping slimy ooze, making a slippery puddle underneath it. The body was already starting to smell. He got the job in the summertime when the morgue became full of floaters and those who had succumbed to the heat. He had to stay on the premises all night long to receive bodies and to deliver them to friends or family. In between deliveries, he would take naps on a lounge area in the back. Upon a shelf were 2 or 3 infants pickled in alcohol, and a man's heart with a knife blade in it also sat sealed inside a jar with alcohol. The gas jet flickered on the jars, and he thought he could see those infants grinning at him, and their chests seemed to move with breath. The heart appeared to palpitate. Then he heard a strange clacking, crunching noise like teeth hitting each other. He looked at a skull on a shelf above him. Then suddenly one of them moved, the jaws moving, and something flashed behind its eyes. It sat on the edge of the shelf, and then it fell to the ground, landing on a feather duster. It rolled towards him, and the clacking continued. He grabbed it, and a large insect flew out. Eventually he learned to overcome his nerves and sleep when the chance presented itself. However, he was awakened 2 or 3 times by explosions. He would go to the dead room to find that one of the floaters had burst and splattered the walls, causing him to slip as he trekked across the floor. Other times the rats would get in among the coffin full of bones and make a horrible clatter. What else was there to do except drive them away? Every once in a while he would hear the sounds of talking in the dead room. He'd look and see forms of men in the gloom. When he turned on the light, they were the clothes of the unknown dead hanging on the wall for identification. He witnessed the medical examiner completing many autopsies, which were performed by Dr. James C. Nidlett, who was chief surgeon under General Price in the Confederate Army during the Civil War before coming to St. Louis. In 1885, the morgue superintendent received the body of Tom Boswick, 36, a saloon keeper, and Mamie McGew, whose real name was Mary Guerin. Boswick killed himself at Madame North's, a well-known brothel. The immediate cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was cut in his hand and 5 times in the body, which indicated perhaps his victim had tried to defend herself. The story told of what led to the crime was that Mary Guerin asked for a downstairs room when they arrived at Madame North's, but Boswick insisted on going upstairs. It appeared he suspected she would try to escape from the murder-suicide plot he had decided to carry out that day. Mary claimed she was about 27 years old and married to a man who worked at Hilton's restaurant. She had come to St. Louis about 1881 and worked at Molly Hines' house. The coroner had referred to her as an outcast, which was a euphemism of the times for a prostitute. Once a man came from Illinois with a requisition for her arrest on the charge of stealing silverware. She was arrested and given over to Mr. Carroll, who came on behalf of the Springfield courts in Illinois and who claimed to be related to her by marriage. Mr. Carroll ran out of money before he could get back to Springfield, and she returned to St. Louis, where the police declined to rearrest her. Amidst the scandal, Bostwick's wife arrived from Cincinnati and identified her husband at the morgue. She confirmed her husband was a barkeeper by trade. He had told her that the woman, referring to Mary Guerin, insisted on pursuing him and that she was the cause of all his troubles. He had never mentioned he would kill himself. J.B. Guerin, who was married to Mary Guerin, arrived at the morgue and was very mournful. He testified he had been married 15 months and that his wife had complained that Bostwick threatened to kill her because she wouldn't marry him. He had known her as a widow by the name of Mrs. Goodwin, when in reality it was Edwards, and she was no widow. She had always behaved as a good wife, and he had no idea she was living a double life, and being unfaithful with a saloon cooper she knew from her days as a prostitute. Bostwick was also known to have beaten Mary several times. Lizzie Bostwick was described by the coroner to have stared at the dead Mary Guerin with intense hate. When asked if she would bury her husband, she said, "No, those who got his money can bury him. I will not." The coroner's inquest arrived at the following verdict. Quote, "We, the jury, find that the deceased Mary Guerin came to her death at about 5:30 o'clock p.m., February 26, 1885, in the second-story front room of number 116 North 9th Street, from internal hemorrhage, the result of a gunshot wound of the chest, inflicted by a ball fired from a pistol in the hands of one Thomas Bostwick. And we, the jury, find that the said Thomas Bostwick, now deceased, was responsible for the death of said Mary Guerin." End quote. Through the years, the coroner had seen family members come and take a deceased person for burial, which they had not seen for years. He witnessed women fight like tigers over the corpse of a dead man who in life was not worth his salt. Some men came to claim a woman's property, but never bury a woman to whom he had been attached by any of the ties unrecognized by the law. People would visit for days and days, and you could tell by the way they acted they were afraid, yet anxious to find someone for whom they were looking. There was another time when the coroner was sitting on the steps, and a man came up to him. A woman had just left after asking him about the bodies. The man asked, "Know that woman?" "No," the coroner replied. The man said that he was following her, and if I find anything out, you'll have her here tonight. He left. 2 hours later, the woman was brought to the morgue dead. The man had kept his word, for he shot her in their home on Gratiot Street. His name was Milton Neal, and her name was Nettie Hayden. She was 29 years old when she died. It seemed jealousy motivated the murder. Each of them were married to other people, but had been living together for 5 years and produced 5 children. Neal was charged with second-degree murder for shooting his mistress, and in 1887 was sentenced to 10 years in the penitentiary. He had worked as a car porter at the Pullman Palace. Neal had testified at his trial that he had shot her accidentally after she attacked him. However, Nettie's 10-year-old son, Haggie Hayden, said he saw Neal push his mother behind a door and shoot her. Dr. Maxwell Lennox was described, this is another story, as a dude from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He wore his hair banged like a girl. His manners were very effeminate, which he even carried so far as to walk with short mincing steps like a woman. Before eating, he would arrange his hair, touching it up delicately and puffing out the curls. He was seen in the company of Charles Arthur Pellicer for several days, at the Southern Hotel in St. Louis for several days. Then Pellicer dropped from sight. What had led to the discovery was a foul smell coming from room 144. 3 pieces of luggage were found there, but it was a certain trunk which had the odor coming from it. By then, Dr. Maxwell Lennox had disappeared. However, upon opening the trunk, they found out where Pellicer had gone. His mostly nude body was stuffed inside. He was wearing drawers too small for him, embroidered with the initials HMB. Tacked to his head was a message that read, "Thus perish all traitors to the cause." Later it was determined that Maxwell had left a note on the body in an effort to paint the murder as at the hand of some secret society. According to the coroner, the body had been in the trunk for almost 2 weeks. His tongue was protruding, he had large blisters on both legs, and a cross carved into the flesh on the breast. Later it was discovered that he had died from chloroform that had been purchased by Dr. Maxwell. The coroner injected embalming fluids into Preller so that his features would become recognizable since decomposition had made him unrecognizable. The motive for the crime was robbery. By the time the body was discovered, Maxwell had left St. Louis. However, in his haste, he left many clues behind. Most had been useless items that belonged to Preller. However, he did leave information as to who he really was. His name, as well as his title of doctor, were fictitious. Based on information police found in the room, his true name was Hugh Mottram Brooks. He took $700 cash, jewels, and valuable papers from the victim. The authorities learned he was heading to San Francisco, where he would take a ship to Auckland, New Zealand. He traveled as T.C. de Augier, and when he arrived in San Francisco, he posed as a Frenchman. Initially, he shunned attention, but he couldn't overcome his peacock tendency and became the focus of many eyes, which seemed to suit his vanity. Unknown to him, while he sailed, the story of the murder had been written up in newspapers around the world. Police were waiting for him on the docks in New Zealand. Detectives from St. Louis traveled there to bring him back. During the trial, Brooke claimed he was treating his friend for a private disease and accidentally used too much chloroform. The jury didn't believe him, and he was found guilty, even when his parents Samuel and Hannah Brooks asked for clemency from the governor. There was no reprieve. On August 10, 1886, he was hanged at the Four Courts with 200 witnesses in attendance. This was right next to the morgue. According to the coroner, the worst bodies to handle after the floaters were those of victims of railroad accidents who were mangled and torn to shreds. One man, who was struck by a train near the cemetery and dragged about 400 yards, was brought in a barrel. There was nothing in the horrible heap which could be recognized as the remains of a human body, except for a little finger. He was never identified. Another man, who was run over at the mouth of the tunnel, had his head cut off at the shoulders clean as if done with a knife. He dressed the body and sewed on the head and hid the stitches with a high-standing collar and dressed him nicely. He was sent home looking as if he had died in bed. There were times when he used wooden sticks where the bones had been torn out and fastened flesh around the sticks. Let me tell you something. Again, I can fall back on modern day sensibilities, but let me tell you, you would need to be really hard up on a job to go for this one. Floaters, people that explode. No, 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 no. No, wow. I don't know. I'd have to think good and hard about that one. Okay, the next story is out of the U.S. Sun, and this is titled Alien Invasion, Mystery Over Village Terrorized by a 7-Foot Face-Peeling Aliens Could Be Solved as Investigators Find Sinister Answers. Okay. Petrified locals in San Antonio de Pintuyacu have blamed yellow-eyed beasts for the attempted abduction of a teenage girl and even claimed the mysterious attackers tried to remove her face. Wow. Let's see. Let me go. After the attack, American explorer Timothy Alberino traveled with ex-Marine pal Doug Thornton deep into the Peruvian jungle to investigate. Arriving in the remote village following a 2-day boat trip, the pair were met with an eerie scene and a crowd of frightened locals. They described it as everyone is very on edge. The men are in a state of heightened vigilance. The 40-year-old said locals are patrolling the village every night and have burned down 5 acres of trees to give a clear view into the forest to see anything approaching from the undergrowth. The villagers have reported dozens of sightings of huge 7-foot figures dressed in black body armor with oval-shaped helmets and yellow eyes. They claim the assailants fly silently through the air on light-up oval platforms and have huge metal discs attached to their feet that allow them to click into the boards. So far, there has only been one attack reported, but another local claims he had a close encounter when he shot one of the creatures at point-blank range. He said the alien was knocked down by the blast but was unharmed and rose and disappeared. Villagers said they have seen the mysterious figures many times and also witnessed UFOs soaring silently overhead. Timothy said they have described the UFOs as advanced aerospace vehicle size of a helicopter, an acorn shape, and unconventional technology. The savage attack on a young girl was one of the most disturbing of its kind in recent years. When Timothy spoke to the 15-year-old victim, Talia, he explained she was so shaken up that she didn't talk to him the first time and he had to return the following day. She was suffering from extreme PTSD. She would quiver, quake, and hide her face, he said. But when the explorer gained the youngster's trust, she revealed the details of her nightmare ordeal. Talia told Timothy that she was picking fruit in the garden just after sunset when she heard rustling in the bushes. She then described an assailant shooting out of the darkness, riding a glowing platform, before grabbing her from behind. Before she could scream, the so-called alien covered her mouth, and a second creature emerged and grabbed her legs. The pair then worked together to drag her behind a chicken coop. The situation took a turn for the worse when a syringe was put into Talia's nose and a cream was smeared all over her face, making it go numb. The attackers then allegedly took out a scalpel and dragged it across the terrified teen's skin, making 2 deep incisions in her neck. But Talia bravely fought back and tried to pull off one of the helmets of the creatures. It was at this point one of them released its grip and she was able to scream for help. During the struggle, she said one of them complained about using too much cream and told the other it would ruin the flesh and make her face more difficult to remove. After hearing the girl's screams, her brothers and neighbors rushed to her aid and caught a glimpse of the assailants fleeing the scene. They found the teenager lying on the ground bloodied up in a chemically induced semi-conscious state. I know the neighbors absolutely saw the assailants, and they saw these very tall people dressed in black head to foot, Timothy said. They were floating on circular hoverboard platforms, maneuvering on them in between trees. These guys are very dexterous on these things, and they shot up into the sky. Although it's unclear what the alleged attackers' intentions were, the explorers believe they are meant to cause harm. In a bid to protect the villagers, Timothy and his ex-military pal taught the men in the area how to use assault rifles. They also brought over provisions like rice and sugar, as locals are too scared to go out hunting in the forest and have been left with little food. Timothy, however, does not believe the sinister attacks are the result of alien invaders, and local authorities have also previously dismissed the terrified villagers' accounts, instead saying the attackers are likely to be human. Timothy explained, "Worst case scenario, this is an international organization of organ harvesters or sex traffickers who are in possession of top secret hardware, and they are using it to do something very sinister. I honestly believe that that's what we're dealing with here." Before the recent spate of attacks, creatures that peeled off the faces of their victims were only known in urban legends and were dubbed face peelers. But now villagers fear the creatures might be more than the twisted villains they heard about in a fairy tale. Following the attack, police were called to the scene to investigate and came up with a theory that the assailants were trying to drive off the locals to claim the land. They may have been using drones and other theatrics to scare them away from their village. Timothy said the villagers were insulted by this because only 2 cops went to the area and conducted a rudimentary investigation before reaching their conclusion without any evidence. Okay, the explorers' investigation comes after reports of sightings began to emerge in August. Police went to the Amazon jungle to also probe reports of mysterious assailants made by the Iquitu indigenous people. Recent video emerged of a black ops man who appears to be hiding in the treetops. Although some believe it is related to San Antonio de Pintuyacu sightings, Timothy is skeptical as it was taken more than 500 miles away in the Pichanacui district of Peru. Okay. Let me see. Oh. Now, let me tell you, you see that other story that we were talking about using AI and drones and stuff like that? See, it's not as far-fetched as you think. Like that, you could say, well, is there any guarantee that this is going to
traumatizes?
Okay, as for just wartime, let's this is a short video that's part of the story. Here we go. Let's put this back to the beginning, and here we go.
Toma tu tiempo, yo sé que es difícil. It's extremely traumatized, this girl.
She just stood there and trembled. Head to foot, trembled. For probably a good 2 minutes, just stood there silent, trembling. She could not speak. Obviously something very traumatic had happened to her right there in the backyard where we were standing. And the assailants were my height, I'm 6'1", reminded her of the assailants because they were very tall. So what happened to Talia? What happened to this young lady is that one night, one evening, she was picking fruit from her tree. And this was right after dusk, so it just got dark. She's picking fruit from the tree. She's knocking the fruit down with this long stick. And the fruit falls to the ground. Talia proceeds to bend over and pick up the fruit that fell to the ground, and there are under the tree there are some dead leaves, and suddenly she feels this gust of wind behind her, and the leaves she notices rustle as she goes to pick up the fruit. She feels this gust of wind, and the leaves are rustling a little bit on the ground, and so she looks behind her, and what does she see? She sees a person coming up the hill, because the backyard is kind of a little gully. It's forested. There's some jungle there between the other houses. So it's this little gully. We have it on film. And she sees this guy, this person, this thing coming up the hill almost as if he's surfing on one of these circular platforms. And he comes up the hill and he lands next to her and then immediately grabs her. He seizes her from behind and he places his hand over her mouth. So he's got her from behind and he's got his hand over her mouth so she can't scream. Then she sees another one of these guys coming on another platform up the hill and lands and positions himself in front of her and grabs her leg. So now she is being held by two of these pelacaras, face peelers, one behind her with the hand over the mouth and the other has her legs. The description she gave me of these individuals is identical to what everybody else was saying to us. They were dressed head to foot in black body armor. She even described the body armor in greater detail than anyone else. She described how it was on the forearms and on the shins, and the chest was some sort of like a breastplate, metallic, and they were wearing these helmets, these large helmets, elongated helmets. I covered the entirety of their faces. So the very same description that everybody else gave to us, this is what Talia encountered. They were very tall. One of them, which she calls the gringo, was taller than me, considerably taller than me. The other, I think she said, was about my height, if I recall. That one I dubbed the Peruvian. The reason why is because, according to Talia, these individuals spoke Spanish.
Okay. So what does it... No. Anyway. See what I mean? If you go based on this description, which is what he's saying, that this is not either paranormal or extraterrestrial, he's thinking the way she's describing these man-like figures and the way they were dressed, that they're human and they're basically wearing some type of tactical gear. All right? And I'm telling you, that's I would tend to believe that more often than not, because even stuff like that doesn't always have to be paranormal or whatchamacallit or ET. I very much believe that there is a possibility, and which they call it carapela or pelacara, which is face peeler. I would be interested in knowing what is the background. How far back do these reports go in that vicinity of Peru or wherever these are in the Amazon, where there's supposedly something out there that peels your face off. That's pretty disturbing. So, anyway, I'm glad you're here with me for a little bit more eerie news, and I will be back soon with some more disturbing but eerie and weird information. Till then.